Hey, welcome to Sid's Workshop. This is the second video of a two-part series where I show you exactly how I design a piece of furniture, from 3D modeling all the way to the final build. This is the build video. When you're finished with this one, I highly recommend you check out the design video. This is a minimal tool build with almost no sanding. And I really leaned into the rustic look that everyone's going for these days. The only thing that needs to be smoothed to the touch is the top. Because of that, I barely sanded anything, making this project very fast. So, let's go down to the workshop and I'll show you exactly how I built this thing. These scraps are from benches I was batching out a few years back. This angled dado that you see here is going to have to be filled in, only for strength purposes, as I'll be able to hide it by putting it at the back of the table. The ends of my scraps are already at the right angle to fit in the dados nicely, so I matched my blade angle to it, measured, and cut. For the safety squad who just saw my thumb way too close to that blade, don't worry, I still have all my fingers and I'm going to lie to you and tell you I was safer for the rest of the build. This patchwork isn't the best, but I've come to the conclusion that mistakes and blemishes give the piece character, helping the rustic look. I usually don't build rustic furniture, but I've been leaning into it lately for the minimal sanding, speed, and overall lack of attention to detail that, let's be honest, only the builder even notices. I squared up the ends with the miter saw, and then cut all the pieces to the length as per the cut list I made from the Sketchup diagram. The beauty of designing the piece of furniture I'm building is time savings. The design literally only calls for 2x10s because I happen to have 2x10s. I also designed it so that all the cuts were at 90 degrees, allowing me to make them all on the miter saw, including the 2x10s that I'm cutting into the back, sides, and top pieces. So we're already on to stain and assembly. I'm using an oil-based weathered wood stain here, and I'm literally soaking the wood, only cleaning up the drips. If you wanted less color, you'd have to A, sand the wood, and B, wipe up the stain pretty much instantly. These 2x10 sides are actually rough cut 2x10s, meaning they're true to size, straight off the sawmill. So I'm giving them a quick sand with 120 grit. Rough cut wood is extremely porous, and this will help to close up some of the pores and smooth out any splintery bits. Assembly is going to be done in 4 stages. Stage 1 is assembling the sides. I use the top of my table saw for all assemblies as it's definitely the flattest thing I have in my shop. I'm using glue and screws to hold everything together. The glue will provide the strength for the joint, and the screws are more or less just there for clamping force while the glue dries. I'm pre-drilling each hole with a bit used to pre-drill cabinet faces. It's got a small pilot bit for the screw to go into, and then it flares out to countersink the screw head. I'm drilling them fairly deep as I'll be covering them with a dowel later. And I'm measuring out the spacing for my screws because even though we're going for rustic here, I'm not a savage. Each end of the sides and stretchers gets a generous layer of glue. This is end grain, and end grain soaks up glue like a sponge, so I always go overboard. For screws, I'm using a number 8 construction screw, although I don't think it really matters. You could use deck screws or whatever you have, really. I'm also making sure to not over tighten the screws, as I don't want all the glue to get squeezed out. Also, for those wondering, I'm using Gorilla Glue. Of all the wood glues I've used, I found it dries the clearest. A lot of wood glues have a yellow tint to them, and even if you sand down the squeeze out, the wood below is stained yellow, which can make blemishes in the staining or finishing process. Stage 2, attaching the sides together. The bottom stretcher that holds the lower shelf is getting the same countersunk screw and glue as before. Measured out for symmetry and lack of savagery. For the front and back pieces, I'm just using pocket hole screws. I use the single pocket hole Craig jig and their adjustable clamp, not the self-adjusting one. As cool as it is, it's way too expensive for me. I like to put screws in the holes before placing the pieces. This helps mitigate the pieces slipping around as you try to sink the screw. You can see in this glue shot here that the screws are just poking through. They act like spikes holding the pieces of wood in place until the screws are fully sunk in. Alternatively, you could clamp the piece of wood in its assembled spot before sinking the screws. Once I had both bases assembled, I came back with a dowel, flush cut trim saw, and wood glue to fill the screw holes. This is one of the places I really leaned into the rustic look and just let the saw scratch up the wood. Then I came back with a stain to cover it all up. Stage 3. While the glue is drying, I'm going to assemble the tops and shelves. Cutting them down on the miter saw as per usual. I missed the shot, but I cut the two edges I'm gluing together on the table saw. Not like a lot, like a quarter of a blade width, just enough to give the two mating surfaces a bit of a straighter edge. Then I'm just gluing them all up. Within an hour or two, the glue joints had cured enough that I could take them out of their clamps and cut them to their final size. I'm using the 10-inch sliding Makita, but I wouldn't recommend this for everyone. I'm 6'5" and I have the leverage to be able to do something like this, and I set the bench up so that I'm not holding the wood up. For those that think this is unsafe, my wife was there the entire time and she said nothing about it. I know because I listened to the whole conversation in the clip. After that, I gave the tops and shelves a quick sand with 120 grit, and you'll never guess how I attach it to the base. Unless you're going to guess the same thing I've been doing the entire time: glues and screws. Glues and screws. Glues and screws. Pre-drilling. Always measuring the holes for lack of savagery. Filling them in with a dowel and sanding those dowels flush. Before the last stage of assembly, the drawers, I'm going to finish the nightstands with clear coat. I'm using a water-based polyurethane, and I'm brushing it on the tops to get a nice heavy coat, but for the bases I'm spraying. Hand sanding it with 400 grit in between coats. And I put on about 6 total. So I didn't really plan the drawer size ahead of time. I had an idea of sizes and such, but since I was using scrap wood, nothing could be determined till the base was built. So I picked up 16-inch drawer slides, since that's the max depth I can have, as the bases are 18 inches deep. First, I measured the thickness of the drawer slide and multiplied that by 2. Subtract that from the width of the drawer. In my case, it was 17 inches. Therefore, I'll be building a 16 by 16 inch drawer. Well, actually, I'll be building 4 of them. Make that 2. I'm using 3/4 plywood for the drawer's sides and ends, and 3/8 inch plywood for the bottom. I'll need 4 pieces cut to 16 inches, and 4 pieces cut to 16 inches minus the thickness of the 2 sides. Of course, I'm cutting these to length on the miter saw. The bottom of the drawer is going to be held with the dado only, no glue. To cut the dado, I'm using my table saw and taking multiple passes. It works fine for small dados like this, but large dados take hours to cut. Don't ask me how I know. For the drawer assembly, I'm using glue and nails, but you could use screws here. I would recommend pre-drilling to not split the plywood. I assembled the 2 halves and then slid the base into one half and put the other half on top. I attached the drawer slides to the bottom of the drawers, then I could figure out how to mount the other part. I ended up using a spring clamp to hold the drawer slide in place, which worked really well because I could make micro adjustments. And then I used my tiny combo square to ensure the drawers were equally spaced from the front. The drawer face is just an old piece of wood from our house actually. I planed it down just a bit to get the board flat, and soaked the wood in Danish oil to bring back some of its color. And then used the same squeeze clamp to hold it in place while I screwed it in from behind. The handle is a cheap black industrial looking POS we got from Home Depot. Honestly, it's hard to find drawer pulls that match rustic furniture. I pre-drilled the holes from behind, not really worried about tear out as the board just turned to dust. Then I used a screwdriver to very carefully tighten the handle screws. Well, there you have it, an entire build from blank design to completed piece. I love how it turned out, and how I was able to incorporate a 110-year-old piece of wood from my house as a drawer face into the build. Thanks for watching, subscribe for more, and we'll see you in the next one.